Hey, I'm Sarah Inman, and I'm excited to be here with you and be a part of this conversation and 6 conversations that we're going to be a part of, just listening to people and learning from them. I'm with an organization for Evansville, and really we are just trying to help people not just be in the city of Evansville, but be for Evansville. And one of the ways that we do that is we want to pursue human flourishing, the good of the city, through the church. And we think that there's a lot of opportunity to do that. And one of the ways that we do that is one, listening to stories. We're storytellers. We have a lot of opportunity to listen to people through our own podcast and a lot of other ways that we've been able to tell stories over the years. But also, we know that some of the avenues and pathways that are happening in our city, we want to celebrate and connect more people to those. And one of those is neighborhood revitalization. Austin, what is this Love Your Neighborhood conversation that we're jumping into?
Yes, and my name is Austin Maxheimer, and I am the Neighborhood Revitalization Director for Community One, who we oversee Love Your Neighborhood initiatives and then coach other neighborhood-based organizations in that. And probably the simplest way that we explain that is that we want to our organization wants to help neighbors love neighbors. And we do that through neighborhood revitalization because neighborhoods are just full of neighbors. And so there's some areas in our cities and our communities that have experienced difficulties or barriers to flourishing, as Sarah said. And we believe that those neighborhoods or areas of our town are full of amazing neighbors that can be the change they want to see. And that's the heart of Love Your Neighborhood initiative. But the work itself is not widespread or well done, this idea of assets-based community development. And so we've been practicing it and failing and learning and growing for a few years now in the work. And so we thought it was time to kind of collect up all the practitioners in the ground who have been doing Love Your Neighborhood initiatives and learning from them. So you're going to hear stories, you're going to hear best practices, you're going to hear learnings. But these are people that are in the work, doing it every day in and day out. And we thought we could create a community of learners. And so we're inviting you as potential neighborhood-based organizations that are interested in the Love Your Neighborhood initiative to sit back and learn and grow and contribute your own voice to this. And so that's what these 6 sessions are all about. And we look forward to you guys interacting with us and learning and being co-conspirators in this great idea of creating flourishing neighborhoods. So without further ado, we're going to jump right in and learn from a neighborhood. So welcome to the Love Your Neighborhood podcast series, where we're just trying to create some content for practitioners to help you be more encouraged and confident as you go about the work, or to have a better understanding of what the work entails as you consider adopting a Love Your Neighborhood initiative. And I'm joined by co-host Sarah, and I am actually going to recede into the participant role, and Sarah's going to host. And we're doing that because one of the values that we've tried to live out is that at Community One, and just as a personal practitioner of the work, we want to make sure we're staying close to the work. Even though we've expanded kind of our Love Your Neighborhood framework to be adopted by other neighborhood-based organizations to pick it up, and I've been shifting more and more into a coaching role, I still consider myself to be a practitioner, a worker on the ground, and I want to be learning all the time about ways to get better, because neighbors deserve that. And so I also have spent, almost 10 years doing neighborhood work, and I want to share just some of the learnings and failings and best practices that I've been able to accumulate over the years. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
Wow.
So that we can start having our conversation.
Yeah, Austin, thank you for inviting me in to just get to have a conversation. I think this is fun. As you were talking about that, so you do kind of weave in and out of being a part of the work and then also helping train people to understand what the work is. How did you even get into the work in the first place? I know we've talked about that in some of the other
we
conversations.
Briefly hit on it in the East End neighborhood conversation, because that's where I got my start. So the East End initiative in Henderson, I got connected through my local church. They did a volunteer call and said, hey, we're kicking off a neighborhood initiative, and we're going to go in the East End, and we're going to meet neighbors, and we're going to listen to them. And at that time, again, I didn't know anything about assets-based community development. I didn't know anything about neighborhood revitalization. I didn't know anything about resident centered community mobilization. And so I was just there because it sounded like something Jesus would do. It sounded like Jesus would be out on the missional frontier, out at the edges of society, talking to people that the society, for complex reasons, had kind of pushed to the edges. And so I just did it. And we went and we did a brief training on how to listen. And we just went door knocking, and I loved that. It was a transformative experience for me that forever changed how I understood outreach ministries, of how Christians have typically framed that work. And we I collected 5 SWOT. SWOT just stands for, hey, what's the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of the neighborhood? It's a great way to just engage neighbors as a listening tool. And I just did that. We did 5 collected on the porch in the East End, 5 of those, and it sent me on a journey, a long journey of understanding what neighborhood work is. But that's how I got my start.
And then being able to kind of learn some of the things what were some of the things when you first, like you just mentioned it, like that it changed the way you saw it? What do you mean? Like, tell me more about like what really shifted from what you had seen as outreach ministry to why it was different after that. Yeah,
so I think the people of faith, especially the Christian faith, look at Jesus and they think of things like, he said, I came to serve and not be served, right? And we see him working alongside people that needed healing, and he brought food to the hungry, and so there is this motivation, what one author calls it the MDNA, the missional DNA, that when Christ is in us, we have that. So, but oftentimes that's expressed through programs or goods and services. So it looks like, hey, we're going to do outreach from 5 to 6 in a food pantry at our church, in the back of our church on Wednesday nights, or we're going to go do a serve day from 9 to noon on the 3rd Saturday of every month, or so. So it looks like these very programmatic, tailored, designed ways for people that are in a place of privilege, or that have the answers, or have the goods and services, and we're going to bring them to you, poor, needy people. And I know they wouldn't say that, but oftentimes that's just a posture. Yeah. Even simple things like a table. Like I would go to a community event, and I'm sharing what our organization does to try to help neighbors in a neighborhood that might need these services. But I'm going to stand on this side of the table, and you're going to stand on that side of the table, because I have what you need, and you're going to have to come to me and get it. Yeah. So it completely transformed in the sense of, we were going to neighbors where they were in the flow of their everyday life. Instead of expecting them to come to us, we were positioning them as the experts of the neighborhood, as opposed to the people that needed something. And if anything, we were the people that needed something. We needed their expertise. And so we weren't going to tell them, we were going to listen to them. So every paradigm I had for what had traditionally been called outreach was just completely flipped on its head. But maybe the most important happened flowing out of that first listening session or listening experience, was that it was holistic. It didn't stop. It was ongoing, and it cared about the whole person. Jesus said to love the Lord God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. That's just a way of saying your whole self. And so there are neighbors that have barriers to loving God with all of their self in their heart, mind, soul, and or strength. And so as we come as participants in the restorative work of God, we come not to just meet a need or do a time or deliver a program. We're building relationships with people of inherent dignity, of infinite worth, and we're walking with them holistically on a pathway of restoration, instead of part and parceling this or compartmentalizing individuals. So there's just some of the things. Could go on and on.
Sure. No, I think that's a good overview of some of the things that we've heard from other people already, but then and seeing some of the examples that they've had. But I think, how is that, what have you seen different? I mean, obviously talking about focusing on people holistically, I think a lot of times we think of these big events, where we gather people in one place for one time. We feel like we're reaching a lot of people, but there's not a lot of ongoing after that.
Yeah.
What have you seen different about being able to, even if you start with 5 people and one, the first time you went out, like what was different about that later on?
Yeah, the simplest answer to that is the ongoing relationships. So, we talk about the 4 Ps of the incarnational ministry of Jesus in our neighborhood work, and one of those is presence.
Mm-hmm.
And by that we mean repeated presence, coming back and over and over and over and over again, being present, persevering through the hard ups and downs of the work. And so one of the things that's different is this isn't a number in a line. This isn't a box to check through a program. It's Brian.
Yeah.
It's Tashia. It's Cord. It's Jamal. It's these real people that if they're just passing through, or I'm positioned to give them something and then they go away, those things aren't continuous.
Yeah.
And so they become real people.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really, really important to think about for a second, is that Jesus, as he went about doing his restorative ministry, he went to the crowds where people were, but then over and over and over again, individuals came out of the crowd that had a name and an identifier, and they became someone who is known by Jesus. Whether that's Zacchaeus or the woman at the well or the leprous man or the adulterous woman, I mean, we could just go on, Jairus' daughter, on and on and on. These people that had been marginalized by society, they had become a number in the system. They had become a name in the faceless crowd, or they had become a no name in the faceless crowd. Jesus went to where they were and drew them out, and now they became a neighbor. They became someone known. And that's the most fundamental difference, I feel like, is that 5 years later, 3 years later, I know so many neighbors by name. I know so many neighbors by their story. I know so many neighbors by what their passions are, what they're interested in, what they want to see change in the world. And that's totally different than a name on a list of a program or a nameless neighbor that we're delivering food to,
Yeah. And I want to talk about some of the practical things that you learned as you stepped into your time, specifically at TB Park, and some of the things you guys started doing. I know that you've talked about pop-ups before, door knocking, specifically, and then, trying to find spaces to gather people into the park that exists in the space, to be able to get people to just get together and feel like there's a place where they can love and be a part of that. Tell me about a couple of those things. Like what some of the best practices when you've learned from, let's talk about pop-ups and door knocking.
Okay. Yeah. With both of those, the best practice is to go with a friend. Okay. I think Jesus went to send out the disciples 2 by 2, and I think there's lots of reasons for that. So just very practically, typically, you have an introvert and an extrovert, and when we're going door knocking, it's really important for especially when you're doing formal listening. So like when you're creating SWOT or getting SWOT data, because just a real side note on that. Sorry, I'm going rabbit trails.
This is great.
So there's informal listening that happens all the time, and you, as a neighborhood practitioner, you should always be asking neighbors good questions. You should come prepared mentally into every setting, whether it's just a one-on-one coffee, a neighborhood meeting, a focus group, like whatever it is, you need to have good questions for informal listening if you're sitting on someone's porch or whatever. So come mentally prepared to engage people. But when you're doing formal listening, it's important to actually write down and document data, because now you can actually report on that. Qualitative data is data. It's not the same as quantitative of numbers, which are also important. But when you're listening to neighbors, if you're asking them the same questions in a scientific way, now you can document that and report on that internally in the neighborhood, but then also to people who are interested in investing in your neighborhood. You can show this is what neighbors want. This is what the neighborhood is desiring. This is their lived experience and perspective. But if you don't document that, and if you don't do it in a formal way, then you can't share that with people other than an anecdote. And these days, people don't care about that. They want to see actual data. And so you can do that really easily by documenting it in a consistent way. So little side note there
Yeah.
on that as well.
And I know that like even is if you're someone you're thinking about this like, oh, I have to do other work besides just being with people. Yeah, sometimes we really want to be able to make sure that we're have good information to have that ongoing relationship with people.
Yeah, and we need to do that extra work because the neighbors deserve it.
Mm-hmm.
They've been not listened to and not represented and or underrepresented in the city for a long time, which is why they've gotten to where they are. And so if you have the benefit to do this as a vocation, yes, like put on your big boy or girl pants and do the work.
Yeah.
Do the work you have to do. So anyways, so back to, best practices, you want to go because like when you're engaging someone on the porch, you want to value them as individuals, but you also need to collect this data, right? So you need to go as a team. I always say when we're doing some brief opening training on how to listen and collect SWOT data, I'll say, hey, all you extroverts raise your hand. So if we got like 20 people who are volunteering, and then half the people raise their hand, and I say, I won't make you introverts raise your hand. But now you're going to pair up with someone, and so the introvert gets to serve as well, right? And so, but they can be the documenter. They can be the person who's taking the notes so that the extrovert can engage someone, look them in the eye, value them as an individual, be ready for responsive questions, be interested in that person because that's a person.
Yeah.
Like that's someone created in the image of God. And so you should be curious to what they have to say. But just really, really practical things like that. Like when we do pop-ups, it's really good to definitely go with at least one person. But we've also learned that we can sit out in the neighborhood for like 3 hours and we'll sit there for an hour and a half, just me and Merrick or Eric, and no one comes. And we're like, oh no, it was a waste of time, blah, blah, blah. But then all of a sudden one neighbor comes and they stick around and talk to us. And because a neighbor saw that another neighbor came, now another one comes. And so people and neighbors and activity draw a crowd. So make sure you're doing something at your pop-ups that's creating a little bit of a buzz, that's creating a little bit of activity, that's drawing neighbors in, because as one neighbor comes and another one comes and then another one comes. And that's just the way it is. People feel comfortable stepping out when they see that there's some momentum and some activity, and other people feel comfortable coming over. So maybe I should feel comfortable in coming over. Go with people, go in community, go into your strengths.
I know on some of the pop-ups, and you guys, when you say pop-ups, maybe give a little more clarification what that is, but it really is just taking you guys have like a tent, right? Not a tent, but like what are they called? Yeah,
those easy up tents.
Easy up tents.
Yeah,
I don't want people to think like your camping tent.
Camping tent.
Yeah, like a pop-up tent.
We can call them canopies.
Canopy tent, yeah, and a table, and being able to just be in the space and literally just be proximate, like in the space. And I know from some of those stories, you've met people who have then said, hey, you got to meet so-and-so.
Yeah.
Can you tell us some of those stories?
Yeah. So one of the other motivations from the incarnation is proximity. And so we wanted to draw near to where neighbors were instead of asking them to come to what we were doing, even in the context of a neighborhood. So like we have a monthly neighborhood meeting, and we found that while like 20 neighbors came and were kind of filling up the room and it felt good, there was 1,880 more neighbors out there in our neighborhood. And so we wanted to get in the flow of their everyday life. And so we created these things called pop-ups. We called them experiments because we figured, we just get out there, we're going to learn something. Even if we don't connect neighbors, then we learned, hey, neighbors don't want to connect in this way at this time in this place, right? So, but it was a way for us, one of many ways to experiment in proximity. How can we get out to where people are in the flow of their everyday life? And so, we just bought, we went to our local outdoor store and bought 2 colorful easy up canopies. We didn't want to overthink it. So we just put a table in the back, created some signs that said, hey, ask us what we're doing. And then just started popping up all over the neighborhood a couple times every week as a way just to engage and meet neighbors and have conversations. So yeah, it's a best practice that we've kind of incorporated and we train other neighborhoods in, but it doesn't have to look like that. It can look like anything, we always try to recommend having an activity to do with it, whether it's painting or music or giving away free t-shirts or yard games and cornhole or whatever. Yeah, we've done that and we've found a lot of life in it. But I forgot the second part of that question.
Yeah. So, you meet people in those spaces and then someone will say like, oh man, you got to meet this person.
Yeah. So our favorite story of that is one of the pop-ups we did. Again, we didn't even use the tent on this one, is that we hired a neighbor who had decided to pick up his father's, who had passed away from cancer, his big tire. So as his father was fighting cancer, he wrote "Cancer Sucks" on a huge truck tire and started rolling it around the neighborhood just as a way to promote cancer awareness, but then also to just keep himself physically fit as the cancer was trying to destroy his body. Well, he did end up losing that battle with cancer, but his son picked up the tire a few years later to honor his father and to keep the momentum going. And so we hired this neighbor to roll the tire through the block of every street. Wow. And so that's another best practice, is the more creative ways that you can encourage and resource and give to neighbors the things that they're already doing. That's why we listen first, is we want to discover what neighbors are already doing and resource that. So yeah, we hired him to roll the tire through every block in the neighborhood, and then we just walked behind them or biked behind them and met neighbors as they came out, because that's a pretty interesting thing, right? Yeah. Like a monster truck tire being rolled through your neighborhood. It creates a lot of conversations. So just always be experimenting and creating new ways to engage neighbors. But one of those times, a neighbor came out and said, "Hey, what are you guys doing?" And so we had a great conversation with him. His name was Terrence, and he was interested in mentoring kids. And so we started engaging him, and our neighborhood champion followed up with him and took him to the coffee shop and just found out what he was passionate about. And at the end of a couple times of having conversation with Terrence, after he had developed a certain level of trust with us, he said, "Hey, you got to meet." And so he opened up his network to us. And anytime a neighbor does that, that is the bullseye for us. That is just the center of our work, because if we're going to create a resident movement, if we're going to move at the speed of neighbors, when they open up to us their network, we've now created the exponential growth of potential impact. Mm-hmm. So whereas LaTerrence wants to help mentor kids, and if we have a resource to do that, then he's making this impact. But then when he opens up 3-4 relationships with us, now we've got 3 or 4 people that are now being resourced to be the change that they want to see. And so we've created growth in the movement. And so anytime a neighbor might say to you, "Hey, you got to meet," you need to lean into that. And so the first relationship that he said for us was, "Hey, you got to meet Tashia." She was our next door neighbor, or his next door neighbor. And so we used that as a lead. We put it in our queue, and we relentlessly went trying to connect with Tashia. Same process. "Hey, we'll take you out to coffee. We'll take you out to lunch. We'll sit down with you. We just want to listen. We want to find out what you're passionate about, what you're interested in, what you want the neighborhood to look like." And so after, again, resourcing her to be the change she wanted to see, after she saw that we were willing to invest in her, after she saw that now she said, "Hey, you got to meet." And she said, "You got to meet my brother Cord. He's an amazing artist." And so, of course, he was and is, and same thing. We got to meet him, build relationships, hear what he wanted to do. And that's just how this work in its sweet spot kind of rolls out, is when neighbors are willing to open up their network to us for just really exponential growth of change and transformational change in the neighborhood. And
I think, again, just highlighting, I think this is what I think is so important to continue to remind people, not for growth of your organization, but for the opportunity to highlight the assets that exist in that community and give them, just support and care and, know their name and be able to share that with more people in our city and know that these are the great things that are happening. I've seen some of the videos you guys have created. Mm-hmm. And I mean, just sitting there, you're like, wow, this is amazing. And things that I wouldn't know if you hadn't had the opportunity to maybe meet someone and them introduce you to someone else. So there's just so many kind of the snowball opportunity that continues to happen as you just get to build trust in those spaces.
Yeah, and so that's really important. And so anytime we're in the neighborhood, we lead with, hey, we're with the neighborhood association, or hey, we're just here with TP Park neighborhood, whether we're doing a pop-up neighborhood meeting, whatever. Now, we don't hide that we're Community One and lead agency, but we never want to lead with that because it's not about our organization. It's about neighbors. In fact, we captured something called a baseline measurement. So as a neighborhood-based organization that's serving as lead agency in a Love Your Neighborhood initiative, it's really important to do as much data collection and documentation as possible. And so when we say baseline measurement, our whole goal in the neighborhood is to improve the quality of life in the neighborhood for neighbors in a holistic way. But you have to do that from their perspective. Mm-hmm. And so we want to listen to them. Are we actually improving quality of life in the neighborhood? Is the neighbor's lived experience improving? And so we captured a baseline measurement in 2018, and one of the questions that we asked was, do you feel like nonprofits in your community, do you feel like churches, do you feel like government-based agencies have your best interest in mind? And unanimously, the answer was the percentages were very low on all of those. So not only do neighbors not think that churches, nonprofits, and civic organizations, they don't have the best interest in neighbors in mind, they also don't feel like they can give their voice to shape how that work is actually done. And so there's a lot of distrust for organizations because they hear of all these things that are coming to communities. They hear about all this money. They see all this supposed impact that's supposed to be happening in areas like the ones they live in, but it never touches their day-to-day life, or they don't know that how it's supposed to touch their everyday life, or they don't feel like it's accessible to their lived experience. And so from a neighbor's perspective, even if nonprofits are doing good work, they may not know that. And so we want to lead in the neighborhood with, hey, we're with the neighborhood. We're with you. We're as one with them. Try to remove as much as possible the us-them distinction and talk about we.
How do you respond to that, though? I think that's a question I've never asked you of, like, if a neighbor is coming in and saying, like, you're getting all that data, information of saying, like, yeah, this stuff's supposed to be coming in our neighborhood, but it's not. How do you guys respond to that? Because obviously, if you're with the neighborhood, you care about them. Mm-hmm. It'd be really easy to be like, I'm sorry, I don't know what to do. Like, how do you respond to that?
Yeah, good question. and it highlights the role of a lead agency in the Love Your Neighborhood initiative is that we say, you're the bridge or you're the backbone. And so on one hand, when we're talking to neighbors, we just apologize. Even if our organization or even if I personally didn't contribute to that hurt of neighbors, we're still participating in the systems that created that, right? And so on behalf of the collective community that has imposed these realities on the neighbors, just say sorry and just say, hey, we're trying to do better, and we may fail, but just raw neighbors. I've found that neighbors want you to be, first of all, yourself, but then they just want you to be raw and honest. And if you admit failures and mistakes, they give you so much grace, So when we're facing neighbors, just apologies, but then, the commitment to do better. Like we're not going to do that, or at least we're going to try our best not to do that this time around. But then serving as an advocate for the community or the neighborhood back the other way towards these institutions, towards city government, we have to represent the neighbor's voice as lead agency. Like, don't be afraid in that to come into meetings where decisions are being made while neighbors are at their 9-to-5 job or working at home or struggling through the difficulties of unemployment, trying to find jobs and update resumes and all these things. Like, we get the amazing privilege and honor, and we better do it in humility to represent neighbors. Like, not that they couldn't do it, but we've partnered with them in an initiative. We've been invited
Yeah.
to represent neighbors in these spaces. And so go in there to defend them and to change people's thinking and to represent the voice after you've collected that qualitative data and you've done it in a scientific way and you feel confident that you can represent how the neighborhood feels. Like, go in strong and represent that, and don't allow those things to go unchallenged anymore.
That's good. I want to shift a little bit. We can come back to any practical things you want to make sure we talk about, but I want to talk about the personal thing for you and your family.
Yeah.
You guys, if you're watching this, you know anything about our side of town, we always talk about maybe the West Side, and Austin is epitome of the West Side. You know, part of the culture of the school that kind of makes up part of that side of town.
I always say I played Rice football.
Yeah, people know what that means.
So for Evansvillians, you know what that means.
But as you entered into this work and started realizing that there's so much to it, and it meant so much to you personally, obviously it started becoming personal professionally, and obviously you feel directed by God in this space. You moved into that neighborhood.
Yeah.
What was that decision like, and what's that been like, being literally proximate there when you live now in the neighborhood that you're a part of, listening to?
Let me start off with a bold statement,
Yeah,
and then soften it. If you want to do this work well, you got to move into the neighborhood. So we did move into the neighborhood. We're 4 years in. I can't imagine doing this work without moving into the neighborhood. There's just too much benefit. When I hear gunshots outside at 11 o'clock at night, and then I see cop cars and ambulances, like, I can mourn with the community, and it can wreck me in a way that it never could if I didn't hear those gunshots and fear for my children, who are teenagers out and about. I sit on my porch and watch Kent, old school, drive by on his bike, and he goes, "Oh!" and it's like, that's that sense of neighborliness that I would never be able. I can walk my dog through the neighborhood and people stop, and I learn so. It's just, and we could come back maybe to all the insane benefits. I can't go get a banana or an apple anywhere. Like, wow. Like, I like that without driving across town 15 minutes. Like,
so having idea and feeling what people are feeling in that space, like, like some of the needs that people don't think about maybe in the sense because you're there.
And you don't feel it.
Yeah.
Like, I knew starting the work that neighbors had food insecurity because it was a food desert. Like, I knew that, but now I know it. Like, I know it.
Wow.
I touch it. I feel it. I smell it. It's in me. Like, and so the proximity to neighbors, the way to say, like, there's just no way in my estimation that you can fully step into the work without proximity. I mean, let's think about this. Jesus spent 3 years in his public ministry. Almost all of that was in Galilee, where he just spent 30 years living and working and going to the synagogue. And, like, there's a reason why, right? Like, contextual ministry like that, incarnational ministry like that, is just so important to being with the people you're doing ministry with. We often talk about the importance of, just in our church discipleship stuff, of like, can we just be? We're not human doings, we're human beings. Well, that's so much easier when you're just colliding with people in the flow of your everyday life, right?
Yeah.
Jesus didn't have to set up a serve day from 9 to noon on the third Saturday of a month, because he was just with people, and the ministry opportunities arose out of that. So yes, if at all possible, move in the neighborhood. So I said I would say start with a bold conversation and then soften it.
Sure.
That was just 4 years ago. I've been doing neighborhood work for almost 12 years now. 11 years I've been doing neighborhood work. And so as soon as I got a taste of neighborhood work, I wanted to move into the neighborhood immediately. Like, even our decision to move onto Wrights Hill on the west side was designed to be incarnational ministry. We just thought God was originally calling us to a different people group, a different place to be proximate. So, but as God was calling me more and more into neighborhood work, I wanted to move in immediately. My wife, my children simply weren't ready yet. And so I wanted to move into Jacobsville when we started doing that work over in Evansville in 2013. It was the first conversation that I had with my wife about moving into the neighborhood. 2013. We didn't move into that neighborhood, and we didn't move into the neighborhood we were working in until 2019. So that was 6 years for us. Yeah. And so if you're feeling challenged, let the Holy Spirit challenge you, but also breathe and realize that God's timelines are not our timelines, and let that challenge marinate in you. Let that bold statement I led off with just kind of saturate and seep in that. But it's okay. I think you should move in eventually, but it's okay if now's not the right season or time in your life. So.
Yeah, and then still finding the people that do and learn stories. I know the story, and let me know if we shouldn't share it. But you've talked about the story of being in a place where a shooting had happened, and some women came in and said, "This can't continue to happen." Yeah. And you guys started talking about some ways the only way to kind of overcome that evil. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So we had gotten some money to renovate the community clubhouse, and so we were in a construction trailer, and we were having our monthly leadership team meeting, and we were actually, this is like a made for Hollywood TV, so we had literally spent more time than normal at this leadership team meeting because we were coming down the home stretch of finishing off our neighborhood's Love Your Neighborhood Vision for Change document, which, is in year 2 of how the Love Your Neighborhood initiative should roll out. We've listened to neighbors, we've met neighbors, now we've got a leadership team, now we want to publish an alignment document so that way we can, all of us come together in the neighborhood can have the same vision for change. That's all voiced and documented and by neighbors. So we were there about an extra hour because we just all were excited and wanting to finish this. So we were there a little later in the evening than normal. But we're in this construction trailer with thin aluminum siding, and we hear pop, 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 gunshots go off in the park. And I'm thinking, I didn't know they were gunshots, for the record. I talk about learning. So all the neighbors immediately dropped to the ground, and I'm standing there like, what are you guys doing? And I was thinking they were fireworks, so it's just funny how you learn something every day in the neighborhood work. But anyways, the mom, 2 things happened from that night that I think is getting to the point that you're getting at. 1 month later, we had a movie night in the park, and I looked around that park, and in the same place where we had felt this evil and this oppression and darkness, that tried to ruin our excitement of publishing this neighborhood plan, a month later, it was full of laughter, kids running around, food, fellowship, fun, because we had hosted a movie night in the same place, in the same park. And it's the importance of presence, light in the darkness. We won't allow evil to win the day. And we're going to come back to the same places, and we're going to bring fun, and we're going to bring laughter and food, and neighbors are going to feel peace. And that can't happen without the faithful presence of neighbors and leaders coming together to change. But then also what came out of that, so that was just an event. That was a one-time thing. But 2 moms were motivated, that and some other reasons, to start engaging youth. And they did it in the simplest way possible. These were neighbors who are experiencing poverty. They didn't have any resources, but they had themselves, and they had a clubhouse, and they started gathering neighborhood kids just to paint rocks. Just to paint rocks once a month is how it started. And then slowly they started building relationships, and they started building connection to other neighbors, and then the kids started developing trust and coming around. And eventually, it took a long time. It took about a year and a half. They like launched an official Kid Zone approach. They called it Southside Stars Youth Zone, to where they were walking with 11 kids in the neighborhood, cradle to career, investing in their lives and wrapping services around them. And it started with gathering kids to paint rocks because they wanted to replace evil with good. They wanted to replace a positive light of presence in the lives of these kids, instead of allowing them to their endearing experience being to hear gunshots out of their front door, right?
Yeah.
So it's just another, and that, again, just to hit on these 4 P's of proximity, presence, place, and posture. The repeated presence and proximity to these neighbors is just so crucial and vital.
Yeah. It's one of those stories that, like, you hear it and you're like, wow, like the people are there and they're ready to do some things. And sometimes just being able to listen to hear those stories, that we can continue to share that those things are happening, because we want to celebrate those things instead of the stories always being, hey, this happened in that neighborhood. Instead, maybe we can hear these amazing stories of incredible people who are just loving the place that they live.
Well, and I often try to advocate to be part of our role in the Love Your Neighbor initiative is just to be the good news reporters.
Yeah.
like I talk about all the time how, yes, there was a gunshot, or yes, there was even just a horrible murder, and I don't want to minimize that in any way, right?
Yeah.
But that was one act of violence over the past month. There was probably 1,000 or 100,000, maybe even, acts of goodwill and love that were extended by neighbors in our neighborhood.
Yeah.
And how can we continue to uncover these stories and elevate them and report on them and share them with other people, just to change the narrative? And no one's going to do that work. That is on you. That is on us. Those of us who are stepping into this role as lead conveners or lead agencies or backbone support, we have to be the good news reporters. It's almost like you have to put on your news reporter hat.
Yeah.
Go find these stories and tell them and share them far and wide in any way possible. Like Sarah mentioned, we have these neighborhood stories, and they're beautiful and well done, but we can only do about 1 or 2 a year because they're expensive. But just share the stories any and which way and every way. Like, tell great, beautiful, artistic stories that are done and produced well, but also tell every story in any way possible through social media or interviews or whatever.
Just talking to people year round.
Yeah, just talking to people. Yeah, that too. Yeah, just interpersonal conversations. Yeah, share all these amazing good stories, because oftentimes these neighborhoods have narratives placed onto them that are overwhelmingly and always negative, and we want to flip that. Yeah. Because it's true, not because it's false. So we don't want to minimize the negative experiences that neighbors feel. Sure. We don't want to say like, oh, everything's great here and it's all, up and to the right. But we also know how powerful narratives are in shaping action and direction. And it's true that there's amazing neighbors, that there's great things going on, that we're experiencing wins every day in the neighborhood. And so don't lie. Don't storytell fantasies, but tell the good stories, tell the good news. As
we get close to wrapping up here, I know one of the things you want to just people to walk away with is confidence. Is there anything that you haven't said that you've written down? There's probably many things, but what are some ways that you want to just instill confidence in people who are listening and watching?
Yeah, so be a voracious learner. You have to be constantly learning all the time. There's so many good books out there to read from practitioners and experts, dating back 50, 60 years, 80 years. John Perkins, CCDA movement starting in the 50s and 60s out of the civil rights movement, like all the way back to then. Like, this isn't new. It might be trendy or in a good way, but it's not this kind of faithful presence, long investment, has been going on for a long time. But not just in the formal sense. Don't just be a learner. Like, learn from your neighbors. Like, never stop being curious. Get out there and meet the next person, because they've got an amazing story to tell, and they've got just a wealth of life lived experience to share. So be curious, meeting neighbors and being learners in that sense. Know that, especially those of you who are participating in this work, from a faith perspective, especially a Christian faith perspective, know that you are empowered and called to step into this work by the power of God. Like, throughout Scripture, from beginning to end, he showed special concern and gave special words and time through his through Scripture to remind people to care for those that society has called the least of these. God always showed special concern for that. In fact, it says that God acts on behalf of the orphans and widows and sojourners, that he acts on behalf of the poor and needy. Like, that you're moving in that power. And so God's Holy Spirit will resource you in this work if you're faithful to take the next faithful step forward. So be confident in that. Continue to be learners through these other neighborhoods, the practitioners, the podcast series. The reason why we wanted to do that was so that you don't feel alone.
Yeah.
Oftentimes when you're in your neighborhood work, you can feel isolated and you can feel alone, and you can feel like you don't know that who else is doing it. But hopefully now you see you have a tribe and a community of change makers and people that are doing the same work you're doing. So be confident in the sense of you can learn from them best practices and all the things that are making the work go easier and more fluent, instead of always feeling like you're climbing up a hill or having to start from scratch or do things new. And then I'll say finally, on this confidence perspective, don't feel like you have to have all the answers. Don't feel like you need to be the expert. Don't feel like all the confidence has to come from you. No, lean into the community. Lean into your Cords, your Tashias, your Laterances. Like, be confident in them. If you feel like you're not the person who can execute on all these things, that's good, because you're not. And that's part of the posture of the work. The final P is posture, and one of the most beautiful things in the New Testament, there's this formulaic phrase, the humble will be exalted. And so as we humble ourselves under neighbors, as we realize that we don't have to have the answers, nor should we bring all the answers, as we humble ourselves under neighbors, it says the humble are exalted. So God then exalts us as we've given the right posture. And as he exalts those that have humbled themselves, we're both, because we've come underneath them, we raise up the neighbors as God does that. And so the confidence is that our neighbors will be exalted as we humble ourselves under them, and their expertise, them as the best assets in our community are the ones that truly will unlock the collective confidence of the neighborhood. So yeah,
that's great. Anything else you want to add that you didn't get to?
Well, gosh, there's so much that, day to day, we could share, and it's making me realize that we probably need to, keep this conversation going. Maybe include you on this.
Get some questions.
Responses. Through questions, through responses, through as you step into the work, the best practices that you're doing. But I think for now, that will probably suffice. I will say, in the terms of a Love Your Neighborhood initiative, okay, so there will be a constant drag, a constant pull for you to do the work. There will be a constant pull for your organization to execute this thing or that thing. And what I want to say to you as you start in the work is the need is great, and so there will be a temptation to step into the work. But you have to develop the relationships with neighbors on the ground so that it's not us or them. It truly is a we. So that way, if you do act in something, it's not them. It's, oh yeah, we're doing it. So 5 years in now, we feel like when Community One does something, the neighbors think that we're doing it. But that took a long time to develop that trust. And so in these early days, especially if you're kicking off an initiative, the world's going to tell you that you're going to have these accomplishments, that you're going to have these big impact development things done, that you're going to have to see these sidewalk repairs or these houses done or these businesses launched. You are going to have to do the work a different way. Go at the speed of the neighborhood, keep building relationships, and then we like to think of it as if there's a development opportunity that arises, how can we engage neighbors in it? And if we can't, how can we represent neighbors' voice in that? And every decision is unique, and it becomes a dance. Sometimes we lead, sometimes neighbors lead, but we're always joined together. One another. Yeah. And so as you begin doing the work, think about it in that way. Don't be afraid to act on behalf of the neighbors if you have genuine relationships built with them. But never stop meeting neighbors, never stop engaging them, never stop building trust, never stop listening so that you can represent their voice. Just continue to do that work, and then enjoy it when you get wins, and celebrate that and share the good news, because like my old boss and founder and podcast participant, Eric, used to say, these neighborhoods didn't get this way overnight, and they're not going to change overnight. And so take the eternal timeline, but celebrate the wins as you go so you can be encouraged, because sometimes if you don't do that, you can be discouraged in the work. So, that's probably the closing remark is stay engaged, keep meeting neighbors, take the long view, celebrate wins as you go.
Awesome. Thanks for taking the time. Thank you for your leadership in this and also your followership in a lot of this as well. I think there's a lot of things that we're learning from one another, and ultimately just learning from the people that you guys get to be in connection with. And as you're listening here, hopefully this has given you some more things to think about and feel more confident in the work that you get to do.
Go love your neighborhood.